Before it was feared, it was mocked. When German officers first saw the new Soviet tank in photographs, they laughed. Its sloped armor looked primitive, its tracks wide and ugly, its turret crude. They called it a farmer's tractor with a gun. To them, it was proof that Russia could only build machines fit for peasants, not for war, but that farmer's toy would soon roll out of the mud and change the face of mechanized warfare forever. Its name was the T-34. The T-34 was born not in luxury labs, but in factories surrounded by wheat and smoke. Its chief designer, Mikhail Koshkin, wanted a tank that a mechanic with frozen hands could fix in the middle of a snowstorm. It had to be simple, fast, and deadly. No chrome, no finesse, just function. He took the light BT series tank, replaced its fragile armor with sloped steel, and gave it tracks that could plow through swamps. It looked rough. It looked Soviet. And that was its genius. In 1940, German engineers still believed the Panzer III and I-4 were unmatched. When intelligence officers reported a new Soviet design with 45mm sloped armor and a 76mm gun, they dismissed it as fantasy. "Russia can't build something like that," said one colonel. But on the eve of Operation Barbarossa, deep in the forests near Smolensk, those same officers would learn the truth the hard way. June 22nd, 1941. The Wehrmacht invades the Soviet Union. Over 3 million men, thousands of tanks, planes, and trucks. An unstoppable wave. They expected easy victory, facing weak Soviet armor like the BT and T-26. But outside Minsk, a German column met something different. Something the bullets simply bounced off. The toy had arrived. German shells struck the T-34's armor and ricocheted like stones on a pond. Machine guns rattled uselessly against its sloped steel. Its diesel engine roared, and it rolled forward through smoke and chaos. One German officer wrote, "It was the first time I felt fear of a machine." The T-34 didn't just survive, it counterattacked, and for the first time, the blitzkrieg stopped. The T-34 was not elegant, its welding was rough, its interior cramped, and its optics poor. But it did not matter. Every bolt had a purpose, every flaw a reason. It could be repaired with a hammer, fueled with anything that burned, and driven by boys from farms who had never seen a car. Where German tanks needed engineers, the T-34 needed willpower. It was the first true people's tank. The most revolutionary part of the T-34 was invisible to most eyes. Its armor was slanted. Instead of meeting shells head-on, it deflected them. This design, first ridiculed by German scientists, doubled its effective thickness. It was not heavier, it was smarter. In the brutal arithmetic of war, that small angle meant life or death. Most tanks used gasoline, and gasoline meant fire. The T-34 used diesel. It ran colder, safer, longer. Even when hit, it rarely exploded. Its V2 engine, made of aluminum alloy, produced 500 horsepower. Light enough to move fast, strong enough to crush resistance. It wasn't built to shine, it was built to endure. And in Russia, endurance is everything. When German bombers neared the T-34's main factory in Kharkov, the Soviets did the unthinkable. They dismantled the entire facility, machines, tools, people, and shipped it east, piece by piece, to the Ural Mountains. There, in freezing sheds lit by oil lamps, they rebuilt it from scratch. Production never stopped. Even while under siege, the Red Army's lifeline of steel kept flowing. Behind the front lines, millions worked in silence. Women, children, old men, entire families riveted steel and poured molten iron. They worked 16-hour days, slept beside machines, and ate frozen bread. They were not soldiers, yet their labor saved more lives than any rifle. Each tank they built carried a handwritten note welded inside the hull. "For our brothers at the front, don't die before killing 10. Hitler's Germany built tanks like jewelry. Each was a masterpiece, precise and expensive. The Soviets built tanks like bullets. Fast, dirty, replaceable. For every Tiger that rolled off the line, 10 T-34s were waiting. And in war, numbers become destiny. As the snow fell in 1941, German tanks froze where they stood. Engines stalled. Lubricants turned to glue. But the T-34 kept moving. Its wide tracks gripped the snow like claws, and its diesel refused to die. When temperatures dropped below 30 degrees Celsius, the farmer's toy became the only thing still alive. The tank built for mud had found its true home in ice. German propaganda told soldiers the Russians were backward, untrained, barbaric. But when they met the T-34, they stopped laughing. Reports poured into Berlin. Their tanks are faster, their armor impenetrable. Hitler raged. He ordered his engineers to copy it. Thus was born the Panther. But copying the farmer's toy was harder than it looked. The Panther was elegant, complex, deadly, and fragile. Its gearboxes shattered, its engines overheated, and it consumed fuel like a battleship. Meanwhile, the T-34 kept rolling. It didn't need luxury, it needed only grit and steel. Germany had built a lion. The Soviets had built a plow that killed lions. Summer 1943. The Battle of Kursk, largest tank battle in history. Over 6,000 tanks collide across the Russian plains. Panzers, Tigers, and Panthers versus waves of T-34s. For days, the earth shook and the sky turned black. When the smoke cleared, Germany's armored spear was broken. The farmer's toy had crushed the Reich's best divisions. After Kursk, the Soviets upgraded the beast. A new 85mm gun, a larger turret, and thicker armor. The T-34-85 was faster, stronger, and even deadlier. While Germany built fewer and fewer Tigers, the Soviets rolled out thousands more T-34s. It wasn't evolution, it was multiplication. From Kursk to Berlin, the T-34 became the face of Soviet vengeance. It crossed rivers on ice, climbed ruins, and crushed machine gun nests under its tracks. Villagers saw them coming and wept with joy. To them, it wasn't just a tank. It was liberation made of iron. Inside his bunker, Hitler cursed the Russian devil tank. He demanded miracles, new weapons, secret guns, phantom armies. None of it mattered. By 1944, the T-34 was everywhere. What began as mockery had become domination. The farmer's toy now dictated the war. Factories across the Ural Mountains ran day and night. Smoke never stopped rising. A new T-34 left the assembly line every 30 minutes. The Soviet war machine had become a living organism, breathing fire, bleeding oil, and unstoppable. The tank that Hitler once laughed at now filled his nightmares. The mighty Tiger was terrifying until it ran out of fuel, broke its gears, or faced 4 T-34s at once. Its armor could shrug off a shell, but not an army. At Kursk, at Prokhorovka, at Berlin, Tigers burned under the same Russian sun they once scorned. The farmer's toy didn't fight fair. It fought to win. By late 1944, the T-34 was no longer just a weapon. It was an army in motion. Columns of them stretched for miles, their treads grinding frozen mud into history. Through Poland, through Hungary, through snow and smoke, they advanced without rest. Every burnt-out Tiger on the roadside marked another German dream shattered. The toy from the fields was now plowing through the heart of the Reich. The T-34 was more than a tank, it was an idea. While German engineers worshipped precision, Soviet engineers worshipped practicality. Where the Tiger was a watch, the T-34 was a hammer, and hammers, unlike watches, never stop working. That philosophy would outlive the war, and the empire that built it. In villages across Russia, the T-34 reminded people of something familiar: the tractor. It smelled of oil and earth, not perfume and polish. Its drivers were farmers, miners, mechanics, men who knew the language of machines. They didn't fear it, they trusted it. The same hands that once plowed fields now carved history in steel. Maintenance crews adored the T-34. No overcomplicated transmissions, no fragile optics. A hammer, a wrench, and spare track links could fix almost anything. If something broke, soldiers welded it shut and kept going. It was a machine that forgave mistakes, a rarity in war. Every bolt was built for survival, not style. The T-34 taught its own doctrine. It didn't hide or wait, it attacked. Soviet tactics became brutally simple. Strike first, strike hard, and never stop. For every tank destroyed, 3 more appeared behind it. German soldiers began calling them the Iron Flood. It was not elegance that beat them, it was persistence. After Kursk, the myth of German invincibility died. Panzer crews began reporting mechanical breakdowns before battle, even when nothing was wrong. Fear had entered the equation. The farmer's toy had done what no weapon should ever do. It made men afraid of the ground beneath them. By 1943, the Soviet Union had become one vast factory. Steel, coal, and labor, all funneled into the T-34. Even music and poetry turned to metal. Children collected scrap for armor plates. Old men sharpened tools. This wasn't production. It was mobilization of an entire civilization. And it worked. In the ruins of Kharkov, German tankers met the new T-34-85. It fired from longer range, hit harder, and burned brighter. Panzers tried to flank it, but their engines failed, their shells shattered. German commanders began marking maps with black crosses not for victories, but for places to avoid. Entire regiments vanished into fire and fog. The farmer's toy was no longer underestimated. It was feared. Every T-34 crew lived like brothers inside a metal shell, barely big enough for 4 men. They shared food, fear, and sometimes death. They sang songs through cracked radios, cursed the cold, and prayed for one more sunrise. The tank wasn't just a machine. It was home. And when one burned, the others never looked away. Because tomorrow, they'd drive another one into battle. The T-34's approach was unmistakable. A deep growl of diesel mixed with the grind of tracks. To German soldiers, it sounded like thunder rolling across frozen plains. To Soviet troops on foot, it sounded like hope. That sound meant food, reinforcements, and revenge. In the East, you didn't just hear a T-34, you felt it. By late 1943, the Wehrmacht was fighting physics. Their tanks grew heavier, slower, hungrier. Every kilometer toward Moscow drained oil, fuel, and sanity. Meanwhile, Soviet factories replaced losses faster than bullets could fall. For every destroyed T-34, 2 more rose from the Urals. The numbers became a nightmare the Germans couldn't shoot their way out of. The T-34 turned war into arithmetic. Each tank was cheap enough to build, simple enough to train, and deadly enough to matter. Germany built monuments. Russia built machines. In a war of supply chains, the winner wasn't the side with the best tank. It was the side that could build tomorrow's tank today. And that side was Soviet. Propaganda posters showed the T-34 charging through snow, red flag on its turret, smoke behind it. It wasn't just a weapon. It was a statement. The steel heart of the motherland! The people saw it and believed that even iron could feel loyalty. The T-34 became a myth wrapped in steel. A hero silhouette against a burning sky. Captured T-34s were shipped to testing grounds in Germany, and later the US engineers studied them in silence. Some shook their heads in disbelief. They built this under bombardment. Others took notes. Sloped armor would become a standard worldwide. The farmer's toy had rewritten the textbooks of war. By April 1945, Berlin was surrounded. In the city's rubble, T-34s rolled over tram tracks and into streets once reserved for parades. Their guns fired point blank at bunkers made of concrete and pride. When the smoke cleared, one of them stood outside the Reichstag. A red flag rose above it. The farmer's toy had ended the architect's dream. Victory came, but at a cost that defies imagination. Tens of thousands of T-34s destroyed. Hundreds of thousands of crewmen never came home. But their sacrifice had turned the tide of the world. The tank built from desperation had delivered deliverance. History remembers the machine, but it should remember the men inside. Peace didn't end the T-34 story. It simply changed the battlefield. As new lines were drawn across Europe, the Soviets sent their trusted tank to every ally they had. From Poland to Korea, from Cuba to Vietnam, the farmer's toy became the ambassador of Soviet steel. Wherever it went, empires trembled. In jungles, deserts, and mountains, the T-34 kept fighting. It became the backbone of revolutions and liberation movements. Its simple design allowed any nation to maintain it. Decades after Hitler's fall, his enemy's tank still roamed the earth. You can still find some today, running, rusting, and undefeated. At Aberdeen Proving Ground, American analysts tested captured T-34s. Their conclusion was shocking. It is crude, but it works everywhere. That single line haunted NATO planners. They realized the secret wasn't brilliance, it was resilience. Against chaos, complexity loses. Against time, simplicity wins. The nickname once meant insult. Now it meant triumph. The same farmer's toy that Germany mocked had buried its pride beneath the snow of Stalingrad and the rubble of Berlin. It was a poetic symmetry. Fields that once grew wheat had produced the machine that harvested empires. And in that harvest, the world changed forever. Even decades later, in conflicts from Angola to the Balkans, the T-34 reappeared. Sometimes rusted, sometimes modified, but always running. No other tank in history has fought across 8 decades and 5 continents. It became more than metal, it became memory. The T-34's success came from one rule: make it simple, make it strong, make it survive. That rule became the DNA of future Soviet armor: T-55s, T-72s, T-90s. Every modern tank still carries the bloodline of that 1940 design. Because war may evolve, but survival never goes out of style. The T-34 wasn't flawless. Its optics were weak, its radios unreliable, its comfort non-existent. But it didn't need perfection. It needed to exist. Because the perfect tank built too late is useless, and the imperfect one built today wins wars. Post-war Western designers studied the T-34 like a sacred text. Sloped armor, wide tracks, simplified transmission, all adopted. Even the American M48 Patton owed it something. The irony was perfect. The tank, once dismissed as primitive, had taught the world how to build modern armor. In Soviet cinema, the T-34 was hero and savior. Movies like The Immortal Battalion and Liberation glorified its form. Children built wooden models of it in school. To them, it wasn't a weapon. It was the heartbeat of victory. The farmer's toy had become a god of steel. By the 1950s, more than 84,000 T-34s had been built. It was the most produced tank in human history. Nations that couldn't afford air power or battleships could afford a T-34. It gave small countries teeth. It was the democratization of armor and the nightmare of generals everywhere. In Moscow they joked, "If you want friendship, send a T-34." The Soviet Union exported them as gifts, alliances, or threats. Each shipment was both aid and warning. Because wherever the T-34 arrived, balance shifted. It was foreign policy with a cannon. Today, in museums across Russia, veterans still touch the T-34's steel. They whisper names, wipe tears, and remember. The paint may have faded, but the memory hasn't. It's not just history, it's heritage. And for them, it's not a tank. It's the tank. Every May 9th, a single T-34 still leads the Victory Day parade in Moscow. Its tracks clatter across Red Square, echoing between the walls of the Kremlin. Crowds cheer. Veterans salute. It's the sound of endurance, the rumble of a machine that outlived its enemies. 80 years later, the toy still marches. The T-34 was never meant to impress. It was meant to survive. It was built by peasants, driven by patriots, and feared by professionals. It started as a tool for farmers, and ended as the hammer that shattered an empire. They called it a toy. History calls it something else. The tank that saved the world. They were not engineers, not soldiers of prestige, just workers. Blackened hands, sleepless eyes, grease in their veins. Every rivet they hammered was an act of defiance. They built not for money, not for fame, but for survival. Each spark in those Ural factories lit the path to Berlin. The T-34 was not designed in blueprints. It was forged in hunger and hope. Before the T-34, Soviet armor doctrine was confused. Heavy tanks for assault, light tanks for scouting. But this machine blurred the line. It was both shield and sword. Generals learned quickly. Mass, mobility, and shock mattered more than elegance. From that day on, Soviet warfare had a new rhythm. Simple, relentless, unstoppable. In 1942, Hitler summoned his designers. "Build me a tank that outclasses the T-34, he demanded. They did, on paper. The Tiger and Panther were masterpieces and catastrophes. Each needed rare metals, specialized parts, and endless repairs. Every Tiger destroyed on the battlefield cost Germany months of work. Every T-34 cost the Soviets one night shift. When German fuel froze, Soviet tanks still moved. Diesel throbbed through the night, while men wrapped rags around frozen hands. They marched where trucks died, fought where planes couldn't fly. The white roads became rivers of steel. The Germans said, "They fight with machines made for winter." They were right. On the Eastern Front, the sound of a T-34 was unlike anything else, a rolling thunder of chains and breathless diesel. German sentries described it as a heartbeat of the earth. When that heartbeat drew closer, no prayer could stop it. Men who mocked the farmer's toy now dug their graves in frozen soil. Inside every T-34, a single phrase was painted in red on the inner hull: "Not one step back." It wasn't just an order, it was survival. Crews fought until flames filled the turret, until smoke filled their lungs. When they burned, their comrades took their place. A machine can't feel courage. But inside the T-34, courage lived. By late 1942, Germany fielded new anti-tank weapons: 80mm guns, shaped charges, magnetic mines. They worked until they didn't. The Soviets countered with sandbags welded to armor, spare track links as shields. Even the mud became their ally. No matter what Germany built, the T-34 evolved faster. War is not about invention, it's about adaptation. And Russia adapted like a storm. The T-34 was cramped, blind, deaf, but loyal. Commanders stood half outside the hatch, snow in their eyes, scanning for muzzle flashes. They learned to feel the terrain through the seat, to steer by instinct. The tank wasn't comfortable, but it was predictable. And in war, predictability is safety. At first, the Germans thought there were only a few T-34s, then a few hundred, then thousands. Reports conflicted. No one knew where they were built or how fast. It felt like magic, like the Soviets were birthing tanks from the earth itself. In truth, they nearly were. Factories dug into hills, disguised as barns, powered by determination alone. German doctrine worshipped precision strikes. Soviets worshipped momentum. One planned every detail, the other drowned the plan in steel. By 1944, the winner was clear. Germany's strategy was a scalpel. The T-34 was an avalanche. German infantry manuals began dedicating entire chapters to the T-34. Do not face it alone. Do not waste ammunition. Wait for artillery. It wasn't advice. It was surrender printed in ink. The machine had become a myth, and myths kill morale faster than bullets. To cross rivers, T-34 crews drove straight into the water, trusting sealed hatches and momentum. Many drowned. Many didn't. Those who emerged on the far bank became legends. German spotters reported the impossible. The tanks swim. In truth, they didn't. They refused to sink. Deep behind German lines, Soviet partisans guided T-34s through forests and marshes. They marked paths with candles, lit fires on crossroads, and led the beasts of steel through enemy territory. The tank was no longer a weapon of the army. It was a weapon of the people. The farmer's toy had returned to the farmer's hands. Many of the workers who built T-34s were under 16. They slept on floors between assembly lines, their fingers cut and burned. Yet they smiled when a tank rolled out and roared for the first time. They'd cheer, shouting, "For Papa! For Mama! For victory!" Those children never held rifles, but every gun they built fired for them. Soviet engineers accepted what others feared: loss. They knew the tank was not immortal, only replaceable. Every T-34 was a lesson for the next one. That acceptance of imperfection, of sacrifice, became its advantage. Where the Germans pursued perfection, the Soviets mastered repetition. In Hungary, 1945, a handful of Tigers faced dozens of T-34s. They fought valiantly, destroying many, but fuel ran dry, ammo ran out. The Soviets circled, closed, and burned them one by one. When it ended, the field was black smoke and silence. The tiger had roared. The plow had endured. After the war, the T-34 didn't rest. It became the backbone of new nations rebuilding from rubble. In Czechoslovakia, Poland, China, it was reborn under new flags. It was no longer just Soviet. It was universal. The tank of the worker had become the tank of the world. When war erupted in Korea, the T-34 led the charge once more. Against American Shermans, it fought on equal terms. Old armor, new battlefields, same courage. For Western soldiers, it was déjà vu. The war they thought had ended was rumbling again, diesel and thunder across Asia. In the 1967 Six-Day War, even ancient T-34s appeared in Egypt and Syria. Some burned, some survived. But they proved one thing: simplicity never dies. Decades old, outdated, and still firing. The ghosts of 1941 refuse to fade. Today, you can find T-34s on every continent. In jungles overgrown by vines. In deserts half buried by sand. In villages turned memorials, their turrets painted red. Time can rust metal, but not legacy. Each relic whispers the same story. They called me a toy. Koshkin died before the T-34's first real battle. His successors, Morozov, Kucherenko, never became famous. No statues, no parades. But every screw they designed saved a life. They didn't need glory. They left something better. A machine that outlived them. The T-34 was not indestructible. It burned, it broke, it failed. But unlike its enemies, it was built to fail gracefully. When a gear snapped, another took over. When a crew died, another climbed in. That is not invincibility. It's inevitability. Historians later analyzed its genius. Fewer moving parts meant fewer points of failure. Its sloped armor increased survival by 40%. Its wide tracks distributed weight perfectly for snow and mud. It was not magic. It was mathematics in motion. The simplest equations always win. In 1944, British engineers examined a captured T-34. One said quietly, "It's ugly. It's perfect." They realized that beauty in war meant nothing. From then on, Western tanks would follow the same creed: survival before style. Every new Soviet tank carried a whisper of the T-34. The T-54, T-62, even modern T-90s owe their souls to that 1940 design. The lesson remains: you can't design victory. You can only design for endurance. And endurance, not elegance, shapes history. Decades later, veterans still dream of the T-34. They smell the diesel, hear the gears grinding, feel the vibration through frozen boots. For them, it wasn't just steel. It was salvation. One said, "When I heard the engine start, I knew I'd live another day." No monument can honor that sound. Today's tanks are faster, smarter, deadlier. But none have the same soul. They rely on computers, sensors, satellites, systems that fail when war becomes chaos. The T-34 thrived on chaos. That's why it still haunts modern generals. The question: have we built better machines, or just more fragile ones? In Russia, school children still climb on old T-34s in city squares. They play on the same metal that once crossed Europe. Their laughter is the sound of peace paid for in diesel and blood. The tank became playground, monument, and myth all in one. A farmer's toy once more, this time harmless. Historians still debate, which was the better tank, Tiger or T-34? The answer depends on the question. The Tiger won duels. The T-34 won wars. One ruled by fear, the other by persistence. And history does not remember duels. It remembers outcomes. From the ashes of villages and the roar of industry came a tank that shouldn't have existed. Ugly, crude, miraculous. It began as laughter and ended as legend. The T-34 was not just a machine of war. It was a reflection of a people, unpolished, unbreakable, unstoppable. They called it a farmer's toy. The world called it victory. When the war ended, the tally was staggering. Over 84,000 T-34s built. More than 50,000 lost. But those numbers hide the truth. Each one bought time, bought space, bought life. For every T-34 destroyed, another reached the front within days. It wasn't just production. It was resurrection by design. No machine in history ever died so many times to keep others alive. After the war, Western generals examined mountains of Soviet wreckage. They expected crude improvisation. What they found was elegance through necessity. The T-34 had no luxury parts, no wasted metal, only balance. Its designers had trimmed everything unnecessary until perfection emerged by accident. One British officer wrote simply, "They did not overbuild. They built just enough, and that was everything." It was minimalism turned into military genius. Across Eastern Europe, farmers still uncover fragments of T-34s beneath their plows. Track links, shell casings, sometimes whole hulls, buried like bones. Rust has fused with soil. Wheat grows through the hatches. 80 years later, the land still remembers its defenders. The farmer's toy returned to the field once more, not to destroy, but to feed. Ask any veteran what the T-34 meant, and they will not speak of horsepower or armor thickness. They will speak of trust. It was the sound that meant survival, the smell that meant home. In a world collapsing under fire, that tank gave them something human, a heartbeat made of metal. And long after the guns went silent, that heartbeat never stopped echoing. Empires rise and fall. Borders change. Flags fade. But somewhere, in a forgotten hangar or a small town monument, a T-34 still stands guard. Its paint may peel, its turret may rust, but its story endures. Because the T-34 was never just a tank. It was proof that simplicity can defeat sophistication, and faith can outlast fear. They called it a toy. It crushed empires, and its engine still hums in the memory of mankind.